I put Frank Lloyd Wright up there with the greatest minds of the last century. So it was an incredible honor to serve as the Foundation's creative director for a number of years, and that culminated with the design of their website. The main challenge was to respect his incredibly strong aesthetic without being a slave to it. We knew it had to reflect his style and look like something Wright would approve of, but not look like he himself designed it when he was alive more than 50 years ago. And he was a really prolific graphic designer, so if he were alive today, I'm sure he would design his own website. We also had to create a visual representation of a body of work from the last century, he died in 1959, but make it feel relevant in this century. The Foundation is a living, breathing, evolving institution with a school and museums that carry his legacy. So the site had to successfully bridge two very different times. Something I have to point out, and is very relevant to this course, is that a good deal of our work can't be shown, not because I don't want to, but because there's not a physical representation of it. All of the negotiations and meetings with the client, for example, as well as the creative brief we created, the development of the site map, the photo curation and photo editing, the photo retouching, the search for the best writer, the supervision of the copywriting, the many rounds of back and forth on each section of the website to make sure we're communicating what's important, all of that can't be seen. And as I've tried to make clear in this course, that is all completely separate from the design, which is really the only part I can show. Okay, first, I want to show you what was on the internet before we began. This was the Foundation's website. And like websites for many nonprofits, it worked perfectly well. But it lasted a bit too long. It overstayed its welcome. The time had come to upgrade their brand and their messaging. We knew how long a full site invention and approval and design would take, so we began with a quick redesign that would repurpose the existing content but look more like a Wright site, and we could make it live relatively quickly. This gave us a cushion for working on the real site without the kind of time pressure that we would have had. So for this temporary site, we relied heavily on designs that Wright employed himself, as well as his palette. Our goal was to make it simple and clean, with an emphasis on clarity through scale and hierarchy. We wanted to keep the coding simple, so we kept the entire site to the same 3-column grid. Then we turned our attention to the big site. We spent the first few months creating the site map, which is complicated, and getting to know the man, the work, the foundation itself, and its goals for the future, and the material that we could use on the site, what was available to us. And then, and only then, did we get down to designing. We wanted to keep the clarity and the simplicity, but now we had a much more complex website. So we needed to consider the design as it was applied to many different kinds of pages. We worked on 5 or 6 different directions and eventually narrowed it down to just 2 that we showed the Foundation. They ended up having a good deal in common with each other because we came to some pretty big decisions that we felt were really necessary. One was the typeface Neutra. We used Neutra, which is a typeface designed by Richard Neutra for Frank Lloyd Wright. In the past, whenever I've considered using Neutra, I've always thought it looked way too Frank Lloyd Wrighty. So it was so glorious that it was perfectly appropriate this time, and we used it everywhere. We also decided that instead of using elements of his graphic design like we did in the last site, we would use photography of his work to represent him, and that was an embarrassment of riches. The first direction we presented was based on one of the few influences he himself acknowledged and a lifelong love of his, which was blocks. His were Froebel blocks, introduced to him by his mother when he was very young, and he used in architecture later on. The screen was divided into blocks or a grid of squares, and the homepage changed every few seconds, introducing you to a new piece of work each time. It also asked you to focus on a different aspect of the buildings by introducing the pieces to you out of order. The main menu stayed in place, occupying 2 blocks on the far left, and the secondary menu on different sections occupied another block to the right of the logo. Text always filled whole blocks in various multitudes, and the colored backgrounds behind the text changed to indicate a change in the kind of information. In this way, many of the sections got to have a homepage of their own, which was an opportunity to share another beautiful image. We also included a work section, where anyone could find where Wright's work was located by looking for a specific kind of work from a different phase of his life, or by looking at a specific area on the map. For this map, we used a special palette for the Google map and kept it really graphic. Okay, that was the first direction we presented. The second direction, and the one they chose, we really let the photography of the work speak for itself, clean as can be. We began again with a slideshow of images, but kept the screen as empty as possible, so you could really focus on the images, which are awesome. When you were ready to enter the site, you simply clicked on the word menu, and the menu dropped down. Then the menu for each section dropped down from there. Each new section had its own beautiful backdrop, and for a lot of the text-heavy backgrounds, we used the sky and clouds and nature itself, the world the architecture lived in, and to Frank Lloyd Wright, the world he worked in, as a backdrop for the type. And sometimes we just wanted to contemplate the man himself. Other pages used the beautiful drawings he created, which are artworks in their own right. We also built a timeline of his life, where we were able to use family images and tons of the cool ephemera that they had at the foundation. Finally, for the map in this concept, we stayed with photography and used Google's Earth View. When you click on a building you want to learn more about, a box appears that gives you all the information you could ever want to know about the building, and maybe a little more. This was really in response to a fantasy to be able to provide people with a figurative and literal roadmap to create their own Frank Lloyd Wright building tour wherever they go. And while considering all of these design decisions for the desktop site, we also had to consider how it would translate to the mobile site. It can't be quite as grand due to the smaller screen, obviously, but we thought the simplicity of the site design adapted pretty well. Overall, this project involved history, architecture, research, typography, photography, layout, system design, coding, copywriting, organization between many departments at the foundation. In essence, a really good day's work, or year's work, as the case was, for an art director.